Alright, hi everybody. Today's little short lecture is on the evolution of populations. So if you want a little extra reading material, we are in chapter 23 of Campbell. So first slide here kind of summarizes everything that we're going to talk about today. There's two main points to think about this, and these are actually pretty common misconceptions that sometimes kids have. And it's a good way for us to kind of step back and define a couple things we've talked about over the past couple days. The first statement there in red, natural selection acts on an individual. So there are pressures within the environment that are going to cause some individuals to survive and some not to survive. And there's pressures within the environment that are going to cause some individuals to reproduce and some individuals to not reproduce. So the idea behind this is that the natural selection acts on an individual. Okay, so that's a key point. Now, based on this top bullet point, depending upon who survives and who reproduces, will change your population. And that's where we want to bring in this idea that populations are what evolve. It's not an individual. So the genetic makeup of a population changes over time. And I'm going to give you a couple great examples in class, one of them being some pocket mice that we're going to look at in their coat colors. So just to reiterate, if we're looking at here, it doesn't matter. Individuals will survive or they don't survive. Individuals will reproduce or they don't reproduce. Individuals are what get selected. And based on those selections, that's when a population evolves. So individuals are selected, and based on those selections, that's when populations evolve. So take a look at the picture down here. Birth weight in pounds shows you a nice kind of little bar graph type deal in blue. And then you have the percent of births in the population, and on the right hand side you've got infant mortality. So if you notice that we've got a higher percentage of babies being born kind of in that 6 to 8 range. And when we get outside of that range, we see dramatic increases in infant mortality. So what's being selected for is the 6 to 8 range, and that's where our population as humans tend to fall with our birth weights. So we'll have a lot more examples in class so that you've got some good data to back this up. Now, we've also focused a lot about variation, and I know you've seen the snail shell picture before, because variation is the raw material that's needed for natural selection. You have to have differences within the population. This is what makes some individuals more fit than others. So where do you get all this variation from? Well, one easy way is to go back to some of our DNA stuff and just have a mutation, a random change in the DNA. This could be because of an error in gamete production, could be an error due to environmental damage, something like radiation. All of those can cause mutations to happen. One of the things that we've talked about as being an advantage to sexual reproduction is that you can mix up your alleles. You can get recombinations of alleles, new arrangements in every offspring. This helps to spread variation. So it's why we see more variation in, let's say, a litter of kittens than we do in bacterial reproduction that happens. So two places where your variation can come from: mutations and then sexual reproduction. So if we look at what causes populations to change, we come up with kind of 5 themes, 5 agents for evolutionary change: mutations, gene flow, non-random mating, genetic drift, and selection. So let me go into each one of these. So mutation and variation kind of goes around. We are constantly having new mutations appearing. As you've listened to this podcast so far, you've probably had a couple mutations to your DNA sequence. What questions you have to ask, though, is did that change an amino acid sequence? Did it change a protein? Because if it did cause a change in either one of those two, you might change your phenotype, what you're expressing, and that might go on to change your fitness. Now, some mutations cause changes in amino acids and proteins, and some mutations don't. So keep in your mind, an agent of evolutionary change is mutation that goes on. Another agent of evolutionary change is something called gene flow. Do you have individuals, and what those individuals are bringing with them are their alleles? Are they moving into and out of populations? So I like to bring in plants to this. Do you have wind that's carrying pollen a great distance? Do you have an insect that could be taking that pollen and moving the alleles that's in that pollen to another location? With animals, do you have animals who are migrating? We as humans have pretty much moved around this entire world. We take with us different combinations of alleles, and we cause our genetic information to mix across different regions. Now, before transportation was so easy, we typically did not move around this planet, and that's why we see different characteristics more prevalent in different regions of the world, because we did not have genes that were moving into and out of the population. Human evolution today, again, very, very different. Some look that we are possibly moving towards a blended world, and I'll have a picture to show you an update of what the most common human facial features are. So it's pretty interesting to see that. All right, another agent of evolutionary change is non-random mating. And so what that basically means is mates are picking who they will breed with based on sexual selection. And you probably have some pretty good ideas of what that is from our lectures in class, and we'll go into that a little more detail. Fourth idea of a agent of evolutionary change is something called genetic drift. And we have two things to talk about here, something called the founder effect and a bottleneck effect. And we are going to model those in a lab that we do in class, so you'll get more detail with those. But one issue to bring up about this is the reason why we are concerned in losing some alleles from gene pools, and that deals with some of our endangered species. If you begin to lose some of your variation, you don't have genes that will help you to adapt. And so some of our birds of prey, pandas, breeding programs have to consciously try to bring in more and more variation to help to preserve that species. All right, and then our last agent of evolutionary change is natural selection. Having a combination of alleles that provide you to be fit. Having maybe an allele that helps you to blend in better than another one, or having an allele that produces a toxin that allows you to survive if you would happen to try to be eaten by a predator. All of these things are different combinations of alleles that help to provide fitness. And so we're looking at the idea that some organisms will survive in a population, some will not. All right, so as long as you come to class knowing those 5 ideas, 5 agents of evolutionary change, we'll move on in class using something called the Hardy-Weinberg theorem that helps us to look at population and gene pool changes that occur over time.